Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We might just jump in and get started with an acknowledgement of country. Aboriginal spirituality recognises the connectedness of people and culture with earth, sky, and water. The land is alive with traces of dreaming ancestors. Adelaide Sustainable Building Network acknowledges the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains as the traditional custodians of the land we live and work in, and Tandanya, where we do most of our work. We pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging of all Aboriginal nations. As professionals in the built environment, I'm hopeful we can use our work practices to look after country in the same way that country looks after us. And Nina Mani, everyone.
Nina Mani.
So today we'll be drinking our tea of choice, and we've got passion fruit flowers, which from what I've read is supposed to be a relaxant. So hopefully everyone's going to feel really chilled today and enjoy the presentation.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'll then get started and introduce Vanessa Cullen, who will be speaking about Circular Economy 101 today. So Vanessa founded Forward Thinking Design, which is a certified social enterprise championing environmental, social, and governance, sustainability, and innovation in the built environment. Their groundbreaking initiative, FTD Circular, offers expert training, consultancy, a circularity supplier directory, and through their partner Hardcat, a cutting-edge traceability and asset management platform, all aimed at enabling the built environment circular economy in Australia. So very pleased to be welcoming Vanessa Cullen to give us all a little bit of insight into Circular Economy 101 and the practices, and I will hand it over to Vanessa.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for attending today. Basically with circularity, it's a departure from the linear consumption system whereby we take things out of the earth, we use them up, and then we dispose of them. So in circularity, what we want to be able to do is eliminate extraction of raw material in the first place. And this is often something that's ignored, which is really focusing on reuse and designing out the need for that consumption, but particularly the need for waste. So we want to eliminate at the top end here in terms of extraction and production, and we want to be able to eliminate that unrecyclable waste. Now, ways in which we can do that, a few of them are named here, and I'll get into some others in more depth as we get further through the process. But basically, it's like if we can stop the demand in the first place, and then obviously we're still going to have some demand, we still need to consume things and use them, but how can we recycle them back into the process and extend the life cycle? So if you're a bit confused about like, well, where does circularity start? Where does sustainability start and end? The way that I like to frame it is that circularity is a function of sustainability. So we can achieve certain hallmarks of sustainability through circularity. So for example, we can reduce emissions, we can reduce landfill impacts, we can also return back to the earth through circularity. So there's a whole lot of different ways in which we can attain sustainability through circular economy. So it's really relevant for the built environment industry to consider circularity because according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the construction industry is actually responsible for the consumption of 40 to 50% of raw materials globally. That's huge. And quite often those statistics don't include fit out as well. That's not well captured. So it's possibly more than that even. At the moment, only about 30% of the materials are recycled. And we really want to take the focus off recycling actually because it's kind of the least bad out of all the options. It's sort of the last option for us before landfill or before waste to energy. So we really want to be able to prioritize the resources earlier in the process and keep the value within our resources. Okay, so to give you a bit of context around circularity, something that a lot of people tend not to realize is that it's actually not new at all. It's quite an ancient concept. And when you think about it, you probably think, oh, my great-grandparents went through a war and actually they didn't waste anything. They reused everything. And then you start to think, that was circularity. That just seemed like common sense to them and desperation and need, but actually it's circularity. We came to circularity in my business because we work with a lot of charities and they just don't have any money. So for us, it was, well, we have to reuse resources and make the most of them because they don't have anything else to turn to. So circularity can be seen in prehistoric flint tools being repurposed in the Bronze Age, so as early as that. Edo, Japan is a really good example of a circular economy at a national sort of scale, where essentially they just reused absolutely everything, and that was their everyday life. Like that was their business as usual. So that's another one that you can look at too if you want to do further research. Then the idea of circularity as a concept really came out with this Swiss architect here, and that sort of shaped everything from the 1970s forward. But of course, we also shouldn't forget that Indigenous people within Australia were also and have always been practicing circular economy. So really caring about the earth and using everything from end to end and returning it back to the earth. So there is circularity inherently built into traditional ways as well. And we should turn to that as a source of knowledge. So as you can see, circularity certainly isn't new. Now, what does that look like in terms of our application today? Well, all of a sudden we've gone from what seemed to be just sensible and something that we needed to do to having frameworks that start to define what circularity is and which are trying to drive the adoption of circularity. So in this case, I haven't captured every framework here. There's lots more, and I certainly can send you other links afterwards. But what we've tried to do here is just summarize in a couple of points a lot of the major frameworks that are available at the moment and where circularity is helping us fulfill some of these requirements. So I'm not going to go through and read this whole slide, but what I will flag is that if you're looking at Green Star, whether it's Green Star Communities, Green Star Buildings, Green Star Fit Outs, the new tool that's coming, you're going to see that circularity has been built into those tools and will continue to be as they continue to evolve. So that's something to bear in mind, that if you're targeting those, there's quite a few touch points within the Green Star ratings that you can use circularity implementation to be able to address. And I'll go into that a little further as we go through. A lot of large businesses are being driven by the mandatory climate-related financial disclosures to start to look at reducing embodied carbon, well, start to reduce carbon first. Embodied carbon is going to come from there. But essentially, this is the first awareness from a corporate point of view where it's actually a mandated requirement. And so that's starting to drive that focus on, well, what can we do to reduce our climate-related financial risks? And a lot of that requires you to track and trace what it is that you're doing now and how you're going to decarbonize that into the future. And you'll see the relevance for that as I go through the presentation. Same thing with the National Framework for Recycled Content Traceability. So the idea is that we use more recycled content on government projects, and this will start to extend to projects that aren't government, so in the private sector as well. But in order to prove that we're using higher recycled content, again, it comes down to traceability. We have to be able to identify what is it we're using, how much recycled content is in it, be sure that the materials that went in it that were recycled are not, like that is not a virgin product, that there is a feedstock coming in that is then being recycled. So being able to prove that process. And then being able to prove that that's actually what's been used on site, whether it's in infrastructure, construction, fit out, residential, commercial, you name it. So there's this, I guess, impetus for us to look at proof now. And if you look at Europe, they're particularly down this line, like because they've been doing it longer. So they're really focusing on traceability. How can we track and trace the things that we're saying so that we know them to actually be true? Now, other frameworks that help us are that the Better Building Partnership, which is New South Wales based, but contains a lot of the large developers, they've produced some really great documents you may be familiar with, but there was the Circular Fit Out Toolkit. There's now the BBP Circular Procurement Guidelines as well. Built have created this building disassembly plan document, which is really helpful. It's got nice templates that go with it as well when you're looking at disassembly and deconstruction. And the principles within that document are not just relevant for buildings, they're actually relevant for infrastructure and fit out as well. It's the same principles that can be applied. Within our business, we wrote a white paper on fit out as a material bank, and I'll go a bit further into building as a material bank, precinct as a material bank, and all of these different material bank ideas as we go further through the presentation. The other thing is you're probably going to see your local council will start to, if they're not already, be developing frameworks around, obviously the normal ones around waste and sustainability, but which are calling out circularity, if not specific circularity frameworks. We're seeing it emerge in state planning controls as well, affecting communities. And then you start to see it emerge too in just guidelines. So we see it in design guidelines for fit out, construction guidelines, smart city guides as well, because there is an intersection between the traceability idea and the smart city idea as well, which I will explain as we go through. Okay, so the core principles of circularity, if you're not familiar with the 10 Rs, you can obviously have a look at this slide, have a read through in your own time because we can send this out, but they do vary a little bit according to which source you use, but this is just the one that I've chosen. And the way that I like to summarize it is initially what we want to do is refuse. So we really want to interrogate the brief for whatever it is we're building. Is there a way in which we can use less or have less impact? So the next thing is the actual reduction. So we want to think really critically around, like, can we engineer this differently? So decreasing that raw material use. Then in terms of redesign, so designing with the concept of being adaptive and being circular. So what I mean by that is, are there ways in which we can design components to come apart? Are there ways in which we can ensure that we're building into the design materials that enable recycling or remanufacture or repair, etc.? So it's thinking about how we design that circularity into our projects. The next thing is reuse. So reuse needs to be considered at the specification and procurement stage, but also at the disposal stage. So we have to think beyond our built environment to the next life of those materials. So what I mean by that is, can we design our buildings, infrastructure, fit outs, etc., to think about how the second and the third user and the fourth user, etc., might be able to extend the life cycle of those materials or components, and not just ourselves. Obviously, if we can reuse on our own sites, that's great, because then we don't have the transport impacts. But failing that, how can we enable future users? Repair is fairly self-explanatory, but it's very underutilized. So we often don't consider during the life cycle of any built environment asset, how are we going to build in repair? So are we specifying suppliers who provide that as a service? Are we engaging with local community groups who can provide repair to some materials, which actually creates employment and social impact? Are we considering whether or not we're going to be able to inherently repair that product through being able to obtain components as well? So how are we designing repair into our projects? The next thing, refurbish, is sort of similar, but I tend to say that there is greater scope for social impact in refurbish. If you look particularly in the fit out sector, what you see is that there are a lot of emerging social enterprises that are really focusing on refurbishment. So again, it's not just a sustainability consideration, but it can be a real consideration around how can you engage with community, create employment, create opportunity for people as well. Are you designing the ability for refurbishment in? And when you're procuring for a new project, can you procure things that have been refurbished, so are coming out of that as part of the supply chain too? The next one is remanufacture. So this is where we really want to be turning to our suppliers and saying, well, what product stewardship schemes do you provide? Do you take things back? Do you refurbish? What does that actually look like? Are you harvesting stock for parts? So are you taking back materials or products and then harvesting them for parts that you then put back into product to extend its life cycle? So we want to be considering, are they repairing, refurbishing, and remanufacturing? And they're the suppliers that we want to give preference to. Repurpose. To me, that's a challenge for designers, and it's a creative challenge. So when I talk about designers, can be designers, architects, engineers, landscape designers. It's not just not just specifically designers per se. How can you take materials and repurpose them in different ways? So are there elements that you can take out of a greenfield site and then repurpose into your landscape? Are there elements that you can take out of a building and reuse in an interior? So it's all about that creative rethink. And that's a real paradigm shift because we don't tend to operate in that way. Recycling, I would say the biggest thing that we can do in terms of recycling is make sure that, again, we are specifying materials with a high recycled content, but also when it comes to site management during construction and at the end of life, so defit or demolition, that we are separating our waste streams to ensure that recycling is enabled. Because one of the biggest impediments to recycling is when you get cross-contamination, mixed waste, etc., and a lot is lost through that. Last of all, you'll see that some of the major suppliers in the industry basically talk about using offcuts, etc., as waste to energy, but I generally say just don't focus on that because you can do so much better. So I'm going to leave that one there. Okay, so we've talked about the history, we've got the context to circularity. So let's start to apply that to the here and now. So I could talk for half a day on Circularity 101, but obviously we don't have the time for that. So what I've done is I've just pulled out some key concepts that I think are really pressing right now for all of us. So the first one is rethink. So I spoke about that a little bit earlier. Rethink is about designing out the waste when we consider the project in the first place. So what are the different touch points that we can implement in order to be able to design out any additional wastage, whether it's through excess material, offcuts, through using things that we don't need to use, through the life cycle and the waste through the life cycle. So what I mean by that is, are we specifying things that can be repaired and therefore reduce the waste further through the life cycle of the asset? Also, again, in our specification and our procurement, are we considering, does this element have a second or a third life? So can I specify and design for that possibility? That might be, say, for example, designing in modularity. It might be designing in connections that are like manual connections rather than adhesive connections. So it's all about like, how do we rethink the way we think? So changing our business as usual. That's a massive challenge. It's something that I do a lot of training on with people because it's so hard and it's so relevant for everyone in the process. So all stakeholders within any project, but you need to approach it from their point of view and look at, okay, what is it that you currently do on a project and how can we rethink the steps to be able to build this circularity in? So what are the possibilities that we can manipulate to start to build in circularity? And to take the difficulty out of it, I always say, just with each person in their roles, if you can start with just one thing that they can do. So like one material that could be changed, that could be engineered, one piece of process, one installation technique, one defit technique or demolition technique, like just start with one thing and make it simple. Get that nailed, get some experience out of that, and also some proof that you can talk about publicly and share with others. And then from there, you can continue to build upon that. So I don't think anyone really expects the world to change overnight. I'll show you a couple of examples of how we've done that as well as we go. The next big thing that I spoke about briefly before is traceability. So BAMB is building as a material passport. Now, this is actually not a new concept. So it originated in Europe decades ago. It just didn't really get traction, mostly probably from a technology point of view, but it intersects with the idea of material passports or building passports, as you may have heard it called. So basically the idea is that materials should have attached to them in a digital record everything that went in as the components of that material. So say, for example, if you talk about a product like a chair, then you might have plastic, you might have the upholstery and what the upholstery is made out of, you might have some aluminium or steel. So basically the product describes what those components are, the recycled content, the recyclability. It also can describe the supply chain as well. So all of this information, this data, should be attached to a record of the material or of the product. From there, you then build that out in terms of looking at your whole building or your whole community, your infrastructure, your fit out, whatever it may be. So what you're gathering is a collected record of what materials and products do you have, in what quantity, where are they, how did they get there, how are they installed, and what are the components that make them up. The reason we do this is because not only does it allow us to look back at that and engineer it, particularly when we start to intersect it with embodied carbon, so we understand like what we've got and what the carbon impacts of those are, that allows us to remove components or swap the specification of things to be able to engineer that embodied carbon. But also what it allows us to do is make sure that we are providing the maintenance that is required to extend the life cycles of these products. So what I mean is that, say, for example, you've got that chair and you've specified and procured it from a company that does the repair, the remanufacture, all those sorts of things. You won't know that unless that record tells you who supplied the chair and that they do those things, so that it's got care instructions, it's got the contract for the maintenance, or if it's product as a service, that you've got the leasing arrangement there or that commercial arrangement attached to that. Also, what should be in that record is the programmed maintenance that has to happen during that life cycle. So maybe every 2 years, does the chair need to be inspected to see if the arms need to be replaced in order to be able to extend the life cycle of the product. So all of this information should be attached to that product record and attached to that building record or that fit out record or community record. So basically we're creating these material passports and these building as a material bank or fit out as a material bank or community as a material bank. And the additional use for this and where it sees real value is when we come to deconstruct, demolish, defit these premises or these built environments. Because again, if we already know what we already have, we can match those materials to their second lives or third lives, etc., more easily. So again, I'll go back to that chair example. If we know what the chair was, who it came from, then we can decide, can we send it back to the product stewardship scheme, so return it back to the supplier. But we need to have that record of that data to be able to do that. Secondly, we need to be able to understand, does it have any materials of concern in it that maybe we want to avoid going to landfill? Are there other ways in which we can deal with those materials? Another way in which we can use that register, so the material bank or the asset register, is also being able to determine whether it could be donated, for example, or it could be sold. So if we can identify what the thing is, then we can then tell the next market what we have available. So you can see it's really critical to be able to understand what we've got. Another example that I'll go to of this is when we look at modularity and things like precast concrete or steel. Again, if we can understand what that material was, what that product was, where it came from, what its inherent properties are, that enables us to be able to redeploy it again on another project where the same thing is required. But because we can now verify that it has the performance characteristics that we need, we can do that with more certainty as well. Okay, so as I say, I'll touch on these a little bit more detail as we go. The next one is materiality. So this is pretty simple. Basically, as much as I said, let's avoid recycling, because we want to be specifying procuring reuse first, but then as we move down through the channels, we want to be specifying procuring things with high recycled content. Then what we want to look out for is really fantastic, emerging, innovative materials that are coming out with very high recycled content and which can be manufactured locally as much as possible too. So we're actually using our own site waste to make the next product, or we're using local waste to make that next product. And therefore, bypassing that need for the carbon impacts of transport as much as possible, and really making sure that we are keeping everything within that circular system, not letting it go to landfill at all. So the production of these types of products is that supply can only be created by the demand. So it is critical that you're specifying these products if we want them to happen. Oftentimes we think, oh, well, someone else should do something about that problem, that waste problem. But if we're not buying the products that are coming out of that waste problem, that are ending that waste problem, then we're very much part of that issue. And we need to take responsibility for that. Okay, last but not least, which goes back to the frameworks, ESG reporting. So we're seeing more and more emphasis on ESG reporting at all sorts of levels, even small suppliers, so small designers, shop fitters, trades, etc., are starting to see the impact of this, because everyone within the system is becoming responsible for reporting and proving what it is that they're doing in built environments. So that's being driven by the requirement for ESG reporting. And in order to avoid greenwashing, we're going to see more and more emphasis on proof. And that actually takes us back in some degree to the traceability issue. So in a little bit more depth rethink, there are just a few projects I've put as examples. So this one here on the left, Brown Jersey, it's a retail store for bicycles, was one of our projects that we designed, where we reduced the number of materials and we used recycled content as much as possible and modularity. So basically we created a fit out that could be reconfigured and reused in 1,000 different ways. Now that was relevant for the retailer, but also when they moved out of that fit out, they could take the components and reuse them again in another site. They also were able to distribute those back out into the market to be reused by others, because again, everything was modular, it was all in components. So basically we designed that in from the very beginning. We also worked to board sizes, and that's really critical because you want to reduce the amount of waste from offcuts. So we designed our modules to suit the board sizes and configured those to fit within the fit out. This next one here was a cafe where the client actually came to us with the brief of being very creative with reusing and sourcing stuff that maybe doesn't normally fit that purpose. So we were given a very creative brief. So we're able to really run with that, use a lot of secondhand reclaimed things and use materials in different ways and really reduce the materiality in terms of that virgin materiality. We also used local artists for murals as well onto the walls, and that also reduced materials and created employment. This next example is a golf club, where what we've done there is we've designed an evergreen fit out. So what that means is that they can change out their decorative aspects to keep it looking fresh all the time. That extends the life cycle of the fit out itself because it's not kind of set in a particular period. It gives them that longevity. And as much as that you think, is that circularity? The answer is yes, because you are reducing the need for future materials if you're creating an environment where people can refresh it with a softer touch. And just at the top right here, this is a case study from a company called Cultivated, where they took out all of the chairs within this restaurant fit out and they refurbished all of the chairs and then brought them back into the fit out. So a perfect example of refurb in action. All right, so traceability. Our partner Hardcat, they're an asset management software firm, and I just wanted to use an example of theirs. So in Singapore, they've been engaged to be part of the Singapore Rail Tunnel project. So this is an infrastructure project. And in this project, what Singapore Rail wanted to do was be able to track the precast concrete sections. So they wanted to understand the mix of the concrete, which mold each component came out of, the date on which it was made, the environmental conditions in which it was made, all of those sorts of things. So they created a register of these precast concrete components as they were being manufactured. They then embedded RFID technology, so RFID tagging, into each section. Now, it's really critical that they use RFID. Now, I'll explain why. These concrete sections are going underground. RFID can be read by RFID readers from grounds level or outside of structures where the material is not visible, so it's concealed, so like outside of the building. So if you're doing something like tracing, steel sections or concrete sections, etc., and these things are going to be embedded inside of a building, using QR codes or barcodes, they're great for fit out or anything where you can see the materials, but RFID allows you to be able to discover these from outside. So you can actually understand, like, where is that particular concrete section that I need to locate in order to then be able to maintain that section, or to be able to recall. And that was the critical purpose here, is basically their concern was if they found that they had failure within a section, they could then isolate all the other sections that were made with the same mold, the same mix, the same time, etc., and therefore be able to essentially like recall those components or address those issues ahead of time. So that allows for maintenance to extend the life cycle of the infrastructure, and that is also circularity in action as well. Now, at the end of life, which, I mean, this tunnel will outlive us all, so no doubt technology will have changed by then. But in theory, if you were defitting or demolishing this tunnel now, and you wanted to take those concrete sections out, again, all of that information about those concrete sections is on the software, is on the RFID. Now you can take those sections out being confident in what they are, when they were made, where they came from, what their technical characteristics are, and then reuse them in another project where you have those matching characteristics. So you can see how critical and powerful this becomes. So we're doing a lot of projects with this in fit outs, even with infrastructure, with communities, so community precincts, etc. And it's really critical to choose the right technology to create these registers with, and to have all of the information attached to the material. So materiality, again, I've pretty much covered this before, but you want to be looking out for new and innovative products. Saveboard is a really good example. So they have the Gecko Eco label and EPDs available for their products. So if you're not familiar with an EPD, essentially that gives you your embodied carbon values and a whole lot of other values that are really important in your reporting. But Saveboard uses recycled packaging. They've actually done projects where they've used the packaging from the site or the community to then create things like hoarding for construction within that community. So I really love that one because it's using that local waste. Another one is Noveco. So you may have come across the University of New South Wales's microfactories. Those products have become Noveco. So basically with that, they're taking waste materials of all sorts of different types, and they're creating wall and floor tiles, bench top splashbacks, etc., out of the recycled content. And my last content slide before I just go to some questions, the ESG reporting. So basically, I've just thrown in a few examples of our projects here where we've done retail defit, commercial defits for Stockland, and defit and deconstruction for a local council. In all of these, we created a register of all of the materials in these sites and the products, and then we used that register to be able to drive the defit in terms of reuse, sale, donation, return back to the original supplier, recycling, all of that. So capturing the data and then using that data to match what we had as the supply with the demand. So the demand in terms of charities who needed those materials or those products, the demand in terms of people who wanted to buy them. And again, you can only do that if you know what it is that you have in the first place. At the moment, with a lot of defit or demolition, we wait until the point of defit or demolition, and then we think about, oh, do I need to put this into storage and then find a market for it? Or do I scramble around and try and find someone at the last minute? If at the design stage, we have recorded everything into an asset register, maintained that through the life cycle of the built environment or the built asset, it makes this process a lot easier, because from a data point of view, you could start to match even 6 months ahead what it is you've got with the third parties or the second lives that want to take it. So what I mean by that is that you can start to say, hey, charity market, in 6 months, we're going to be releasing 5,000 of these chairs and 5,000 of these desks and this many square meters of carpet tile. Who wants it? So you're not waiting to that last minute. You don't then have to put things into storage because you're giving them time to be able to put their hands up and say, yes, I want to take that. Now, if you think, why don't I have 6 months on my projects? This first retail one, we turned that around in a week. And basically, that was from the moment we entered the site to capture what was on that site based upon the original drawings and what we could see and our experience as designers, through to when it was defitted back to a completely empty shell. And we still managed to get 100% of the furnishings, the fixtures and the fittings diverted from landfill, which is amazing. And that was just because we were able to make those matches really efficiently because we've put the tools in place. And these are tools that we can share with all of you because we want to empower you to be able to do circularity yourself.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was really interesting. Can you provide some more detail on how circularity is being integrated into the Green Star rating?
Yeah, sure. The easiest place to find it is in the leadership and innovation questions on most of the Green Star frameworks, I suppose, or Green Star ratings. So if you're just looking very quickly, you'll see there, some of them talk about creating like an asset register of some form or a defit or demolition or disassembly plan. So that's the easiest to find. Now, if you go through and you look at things like the materials as well, materiality, you'll see parts in there talking about using recycled materials, using reuse. Reuse is sort of the highest rating that you can get in terms of your RPV. So they're the sorts of things that you want to be targeting in there. That's just a couple of examples. We've actually done an analysis of quite a few of these different tools to show where it is, which again, we can share that sort of stuff with you offline afterwards as well.
So I have a question about the sale of a house. So last year, my mum's house was sold to a developer, and I was told I couldn't take any of the fittings. So there was a fairly new kitchen and a new oven, the whole thing. I did everything I could to get rid of it, find recycling before that. And I found out from the real estate agent that the developer didn't bother to even collect the keys of the house. They just demolished it. So I would have liked, I did ask before they took over the settlement to just at least get some curtains out. And I said, oh, can I get a few more things? Oh, no, you can't take it because it's fixed. So I just feel like there needs to be some better rules around or strategy. So if you're selling a house to a developer, they have to find new places to put your things like a new kitchen, new bathrooms and so on, before it just is split up into little pieces.
I completely agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, it's hard because it's got to come from a lot of different places in terms of requiring that. So what you're really saying is that we want to see government step up, because I think that's got to be where it starts. Why else would the developers do it? Now, there is one other thing that we can tweak to maybe make that happen, and that's to create an incentive for it. So you have to create a demand market for those secondhand materials or the fixtures and fittings. And that's where I'm talking about that we all have to play a part. Residential housing might be a little different, maybe not. I mean, we work with Mission Australia, for example, but if we can create a demand market for those kitchens, for the fixtures and fittings, that becomes an incentive for the developers to actually not just take a bulldozer to the whole lot. So there's lots of different levers. There's the government lever, there's the lever of the demand market. There's also, again, it kind of comes back to local government, I suppose, putting those waste to landfill rates up, making it more expensive. So it's like the carrot and the stick approach. But I agree, it kills me at the moment that we just think that's okay, like that's business as usual, and we're not dealing with these problems. So yeah, you have my sympathies, and I'm sure everyone here could sort of brainstorm all the different things that could be done. We just need to see it happen. Yeah.
Yes. We're
Yes.
talking about the asset registers.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, from like a technical point of view, do you how do you go about doing that? Is it just an Excel spreadsheet, or is it something to do with the hardcat software that you were talking about previously?
Yeah, so you can start with the Excel document. Like it's a really good place to start. It's where we started. So even going back like 10, 15 years, we were doing things like auditing hotels, and we were just doing it on Excel spreadsheets. The reason why we went to Hardcat and developed a partnership and then created our own platform for this, which we then sold to other people to use and license and all that, was because what the Excel doesn't let you do is enable maintenance through the life cycle. Like it's just a document, right? So when you start to look at asset management technology, which actually has existed in the asset management realm for many, many decades, but we haven't used it in built environment enough. What you see there is like, say, for example, you have an asset register of laptops or cars, which is often how asset management is used. They don't just put on that register what it is they've got and the specification of it and all of that and the warranties, but they actually give an app to technicians who go out on site and do the maintenance of those things. And they record that information. Probably the place you do see it in built environment sometimes is HVAC. So they're actually recording the repairs and the maintenance that they're making on the application. Now, what that means is that it's like having a logbook for your car. You then have all the information from the start. What is the car? Where did it come from? You know, what year was it made? Through your maintenance record, through to when you want to go and sell it. Now the next owner knows all of that, all that information. So that's why we created the software, because we wanted to create something that would allow us to capture everything, stick the embodied carbon on it, stick the EPDs on it, put all its documentation in one place, and then allow the technicians to go out with the app on their phones to do maintenance jobs and record those, record the inventory that they used in those maintenance jobs, because that also has embodied carbon and other ramifications, and then be able to do the defit matching too, so or the demolition matching. So using that information to then send that out to the charities and send it out to the buyers and send it out to the reuse opportunities. Another way we use it too is that when a defit or demolition is triggered, because again, we have that supplier information on there, we can contact interface through the platform and say to them, hey guys, we've got 1,000 square meters of your carpet. Would you like to come and get it? So it makes that process of the end of life a lot more seamless because the data is already there. So that's why we took it beyond the Excel spreadsheet, because it's just quite manual, clunky. It doesn't really allow the interface with the tagging as well either. Like it's a bit of a sort of clunky process. Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's really good because the data is so valuable, really.
We found it is like the reason why we were spurred to do this was because, like, using that hotel example, it's such a nightmare to just have an Excel list of the stuff and then be even managing the site and going, well, we've got these charities who want to take those chairs or those pictures or those materials, and the site manager's there going, oh, let me look at my Excel spreadsheet. Oh, let me find the stuff. Oh, who's getting what? Whereas if you tag everything, so barcode, QR code, RFID, whatever, and you've got that asset register, even for the site manager, they can scan the tags on their phone when they're standing there with the charity and say, yeah, those are your chairs or those are your pictures, put them on the truck, right? And confirm that they've been transferred to them. So it's just so much less manual. We did it because we had all these headaches that were costing us money. So that was really the reason why. And so I took the design of what I wanted out, found Hardcat. We've worked together to create the platform. And it's funny because, again, circularity isn't new. A lot of it is actually just asset management. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've got a question from Batul. Is this a software that can be integrated with BIM, or is it a separate
Good question. Good question. The answer is yes. So we can write, so we can use APIs to integrate with all sorts of different things. Probably something to address with that is why didn't we use BIM instead? The reason why we went down the asset management approach rather than the BIM approach was because of that ability to enable the technicians on site. There's a lot of people in the whole circularity scheme that don't use BIM, can't use BIM. It's not accessible as the only solution. So basically the way we saw it is that, yes, BIM's great because you can see your modules, particularly, in modular construction, etc. That's fantastic, but it's not really helpful to the guy who has to go on site and change a light bulb. So that's why we were like, that can't be the only solution. It's part of the problem, but we focused on the asset management because we sort of saw that as you create the register, you extend the life cycle through the process, make it accessible for tradies and normal people to use. And then, even the person in admin who doesn't know how to use BIM can do the end of life stuff as well. So, yeah. They all have a place.
I guess by extension to the BIM problem,
Yes.
I guess in design being, in design ourselves, sometimes the
Yeah.
actual specification of products is not perhaps possible. And so there's this sort of,
Yes.
this or something similar. And so I guess there's that little link up there that maybe is a gap that needs to be closed as part of many of the
Yes.
things in the room to sort of help that process be passed through as part of a chain of custody.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Because again, if you go back to asset management, often that sector uses their technology to verify that what has been procured is what was specified or what was designed or intended in the first place. That's really important when we look at like traceability of materials and materials of concern too. Like, do we actually have what we think we've got or not? So it has a part in all of that. We've been using it for verify on site in terms of, like, say, for example, you go for a Green Star rating and you say that you've specified X, Y, and Z, but do you actually know that's what's installed? So basically we're saying, well, if we use it on site, we can then verify that what they've installed is actually that thing. And to me, that's critically important because we've heard anecdotally from some people who've done a review of a project afterwards that what they thought they had intended to be there is not what actually was there. So yeah, I think it helps to solve a lot of these problems around the governance of projects.
Yeah, that kind of leads on to the next question,
Yeah.
which is, from your experience, do you think the demolition industry is in tune with a reuse methodology?
No. No, I mean, it's progressed a lot because at least now recycling is, certainly a focus. So great inroads have been made, but there just seems to be a real lack of attention on the reuse, the higher end priorities. And I think government's really, like, I'm sorry, but I'm going to say government's quite responsible for that because why did we get a recycled content traceability framework and not a reuse content traceability framework? I think for me, I'm really like, we have to put reuse first and we have to put product stewardship first and make producers responsible for stuff. If we really want to solve this problem, recycling is just so resource intensive that it isn't really where we want to focus. So I think, the demolition guys, that end of the project will be informed by the demands made upon them, and that can come from regulation or it can come from industry. But again, industry is like, why am I going to spend the money changing processes if I'm not forced to do it? Like, to us, we say, well, circularity can save you money, but a lot of people, until they've done it, they can't really see that. And when you do circularity at a low level of maturity, it's often very expensive. So that's the other thing we're trying to bridge, is that we do a lot of education to help people to get to the point where it actually does save the money. It doesn't just become clunky and sort of bogged down in process change. So sorry, that was a long answer to a short question, but
Yeah, I think that was all important.
By extension, I guess, like from a very grassroots personal level, the use of, applications like Facebook Marketplace and like
yes.
Gumtree, there's those linking peer-to-peer abilities to link people up who are effectively buyers and sellers. I guess I was curious in terms of, do you see industry working towards that? And are there any ways in which industry are currently linking up to be able to, know where these massive amounts of assets are coming from and where they can be transferred to someone who's a potential purchaser?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a free circular supplier directory, which I referred to just earlier. The new version of that's about to come out. That's a place in which you can actually search for procurement. And when you do so, when you run that search, if you search for specify and procure reused, so secondhand, you'll see marketplaces come up. So those marketplaces do include Facebook Marketplace and Gumtree, etc. Aspire is a partner of ours, so they are a marketplace for building materials. The problem I would say with the marketplaces, there's a few issues with them. Firstly, everyone should stop creating new ones because all it's doing is fragmenting the whole industry. So why do you have to look at 10 of them to find what you want? So what we need is aggregation, not that sort of splitting of these resources. It actually just makes everyone's lives more difficult. And in addition to that, with the marketplaces, I think the other issue is the whole thing about everyone wants to post everything for sale or donation or somebody get rid of this for me, and nobody wants to procure it. And there's a couple of reasons for that. A, we haven't built it into our processes, but B, we're also scared because we don't know what we're getting, particularly when it comes to materials. Like, again, it's like, how do I know the technical characteristics of that thing? And again, that comes back to the traceability piece. So if something is listed on a marketplace with its tags and its record intact, which is totally possible if the record is on the cloud, then we can get some certainty and start to build in some risk assurance around that procurement of the secondhand. So we're de-risking that through that information carrying through. And that's something that I think the marketplaces really need in order to make people feel a little less scared around adopting them. Yeah.
Brilliant answer. Thanks, Vanessa, and appreciate
right.
Asset jumping in the Aspire database as well.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got interior designers in our office, and like clients always want a surety, right? So how have you dealt with warranties and making sure that if something goes wrong, you can, there's a point of reference, someone to contact?
Yep. So again, if you do, like, however you do your asset register, if you're at the beginning and you want to start with that Excel document or whatever, the important thing is having the documentation attached to the asset. So again, like if there's a warranty attached to something, you as a designer, maybe you know that in your specification, but then it gets handed over to the user of the fit out or whatever it may be. Maybe that gets put in a bunch of documents that get emailed to them or in a Dropbox or something, never to be seen again. So a better solution to that is actually like go down the tagging route, because at least what you can do is inform the user that you have tags that they can take a read of that takes them to that document cache, to that item. I mean, obviously, like, we would love to work with people using our platform, but I don't really like do it however you can do it, okay? Because we're all after circularity here. And yes, you want to be able to know what the care instructions are, how things were even assembled and put together, because then you can disassemble them. You want to know about the warranties. You want to know about the useful life, take back schemes, all that information. So it's just so critical to keep all of this information with the asset, because the asset moves from user to user, but the information doesn't. Like, that's our business as usual, is that it doesn't really move. It gets broken all through the chain. So we need to solve that problem, keep the information with the asset and make people aware that it's there. One quick thing I'll add is that if you put a plaque in your interior or in your building or whatever, it has a QR code that goes to your asset register and calls out the fact that you even have one, that's quite helpful, because if you come up to a building and someone created an asset register for it or building as a material bank for it, how do you know? So find a way to identify it. And that's also kind of nice because you can tell the public or whoever, like the occupants of the building or whatever, that you've done this. It's kind of a PR thing too. So, I would really recommend that you need to make these things known, because at the moment people won't look at a QR code on something and identify that that's what it is, that it would be attached to a register. They just go, oh, there's a random sticker on my chair.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next one.